Hi, everyone. Dorothea Hendriks here, your communication coach and presentation skills and in public speaking. My guest today is Jackie Kloosterboer. She's a disaster preparedness expert. She's had decades of experience helping on the front lines with emergency support services. She runs disaster preparedness workshops for businesses, for families, to help them get ready for the unexpected. I don't know how many of you are ready for the unexpected, should an earthquake happen. I know I'm not, so I'm glad Jackie is here today. Her mission, the mission that she has and that of her team, is to equip all of us and our pets with the tools and knowledge we need to face any disaster head on. Welcome, Jackie.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. So happy you're here. I had never heard of a disaster preparedness specialist. So, what is that, and how did you become a disaster preparedness specialist?
Disaster preparedness is helping people getting prepared for any sort of an emergency or disaster. And I have been doing it for about 30 years, started the last 20 with the city of Vancouver, where I would get called out to help support people. And I would also get called when house and apartment fires happened in Vancouver. I had a team of volunteers. We responded to support people. And what you really see is the difference being prepared makes, not only for the big earthquakes, but even if you have a house or an apartment fire, if you're prepared, if you've got plans in place, you're going to get through it much better. And, seeing that time and time again, it really got me going down the disaster preparedness route. And I've stuck with it for all these years and really enjoy helping to get people prepared.
It's interesting that you say that you started as maybe as a volunteer and now it's blossomed into a career for you. And I'm thinking about being prepared for a house fire. I often hear about people having a house fire or something happening, but I can say I'm not prepared. And so that brings me to my next question. What should people, can you give us an example actually of a typical family household disaster response plan? What should it look like for anyone, fire or whatever is going to happen?
When a disaster happens, your number one concern is going to be your family. Where are they? How are they? And if you look at a house fire, imagine, you've got a family, you go to bed tonight, middle of the night, your fire alarms go off, you all flee to safety. But once you're outside, if you don't have a meeting place, how are you going to connect? I have responded to hundreds of house fires where mom's over here, dad's over here, kids are somewhere in the middle, and the sheer panic of not knowing if everybody has made it out safely. Identifying a family meeting place is so simple, and you get to know that your family is safe really quickly. And that is one small piece of developing your plan. You also need to look at what if cell phones are down? How are you going to connect if you're not together? What supplies would you need? Now, if you have a house fire, you're going to grab your grab and go kit and get quickly out of your home. But if it's an earthquake, the stay and survive, we may be able to stay in our homes. But if you don't have the supplies you need, that's going to cause some problems. Think back to COVID and what we saw with our grocery stores and the lineups and people fighting over flour, sugar, and even hair dye was a hot commodity back then. Trucks were still coming in, supplies were still getting to the stores. After an earthquake, that may not be the case. So you need to think about your daily routine, what you do, what you need to support your family when faced with any sort of an emergency or disaster. And they're all going to be a little bit different.
What are some of the things? Because you mentioned a couple of things right now. Cell phones could be down, so that means there's no what often hydro will go out. Even in a windstorm, hydro goes out. And so when we think in terms of having supplies that grab and go kit, I'm thinking, oh, I'll take this and I'll take that, and then I realize, oh, it needs a stove, it needs a microwave, it needs power to get it, so I can have the food. What do you suggest people take if there is absolutely no power and you have no way to do anything and your barbecue set is not easily accessible, the propane or whatever, what do you suggest people take in their grab and go bag?
Okay, what you really need is two kits, and you need a home kit where you can stay and survive at home, and you need a grab and go kit. Your grab and go kit is when you need to flee to safety. So if you have a house or an apartment fire, you've got to get out. In your grab and go kit, you're going to have basic items that you're going to need. Quite often, fires seem to happen at 3 a.m. So imagine evacuating at 3 a.m. What are you going to be wearing? Hopefully, you've got some pajamas on, but you can't live in pajamas. So, you having a change of clothes in your grab and go kit, having some medications, having copies of your ID, different things like that to get you through. And for food, having a few granola bars, just something to tide you over. You're still going to be able to access the grocery store and restaurants, because it's just your apartment or your home that's been impacted. But with a stay and survive kit, your home kit, that's where you've got to be thinking about, how are we going to cook? How are we going to prepare foods? And, it would be great if you could access your barbecue. So I encourage everybody to keep their gas tanks, on the full side. Don't let them run down low. You can get self-heating foods that you can purchase. They're pretty expensive. And, if you're a family of four, that's really going to run up the cost. But you may have to eat, things like prepackaged type foods and that. And just sit down with your family and come up with some things that, you may be able to consume during an emergency or disaster. And what the big part of is here is we don't know how we're going to be impacted. Will we have power? Well, until the disaster happens, we just don't know. Will it be widespread? Again, we don't know. So you've got to be prepared for a number of different options. And in my online workshop, we go through all of the different options that people can take to ensure they're prepared for whatever disaster comes your way.
There are a couple of things that I want to touch on that you talked about. Number one was you mentioned about documents. And I hadn't even, until I looked at your website, never even gave documents a thought. Because if there is a fire, and you keep documents in your house, they're destroyed. What
Yeah.
do you suggest people do with important documents? And then the second one is, because you talked about your online workshop, is share a little bit of about that information about your mom's disaster preparedness workshop.
Okay, for your documentation, photocopy, your passport, your driver's license, your credit cards, your insurance papers, all of those sorts of documents, photocopy them and keep them in your grab and go kit. A lot of people take pictures of them with their phone. That's another option. Or putting them on a memory stick and putting the memory stick in your grab and go kit, or leaving your memory stick at work. So you've got a backup of all of that. If you do have a major fire and don't have access to that information, it's so much easier when you've got, the documents to sort of, show who you are so you can get your ID back. In my online program, we go through all of the steps it takes to get prepared. So we look at what disasters can impact you and what that means to you and your family. We spend a fair bit of time on connecting with your family because that's critical. And how are you going to do it if phone lines are not working? We talk about how to make your home safe for an earthquake. We talk about emergency kits, what you need to put in your kits. And everybody's kit is going to look a little bit different. We all have different needs. Our families are all different. And we look at pets. And, if you have pets, they're family too. And you need to have preparedness plans for them. And when evacuating, always take your pets with you. If you leave them in your apartment, you may not be able to gain access to go and get your pets out. And I've seen that happen on many occasions. We talk about where to go if you're evacuated. Most people have never even considered, if they had an evacuation order today, where they would go, how they would get there. And if you're not together with your family, you may not have cell phones to connect. But if you know where you're going to go if evacuated, that is going to make it much easier than if you never even had those conversations. So it's all about communication. It's all about sitting down, talking with your family. And yes, it's mom's disaster preparedness, because moms are the one with the little kids. They're the ones more likely to get prepared. But this works for seniors seniors, it works for people that are single, doesn't matter who you are. Being prepared is what's going to get you through any emergency or disaster.
I really like when you mention that, everybody should know where they should end up, should there be some kind of a disaster happening, that you've got a central point where family, friends, whatever should meet. And I know somewhere I read or I heard you in an interview say it's important to also have an out of the area contact, to somehow get in touch with that person, although I don't know how you'd get in touch with that person if a disaster strikes and there is no power, because we're so accustomed to our phones. So what are
Exactly.
alternatives?
Well, let's go back to the out of area contact. This works for a number of reasons. Again, you may have cell phones. We don't know. And most people today do not have the old-fashioned phones. We're all, rely on our cell phones. So with an out of area contact, you simply identify somebody that lives out of the area, and that person becomes your family's out of area contact. Something happens, your family will reach out to that person. They could text them, they could call them and simply say, I'm okay. And then as family members call in, you would get updates on your family. You're not trying to deal with the emergency, make all the phone calls to all your family members. One person is looking after that for you, and it works really well. Several years ago, I had a lady in my office when I was with Vancouver, and she was from Christchurch, New Zealand. And we were sitting in my office talking about out of area contacts. And she said, Jackie, will you be my out of area contact? And I said, I would love to be. And I was quite happy. I'm nobody's out of area contact. I live in the danger zone. So we exchanged numbers and she went back to Christchurch. And several months later, it was quite late at night. I was sitting at home and my phone rang and I thought, who's calling me this late? And I picked up the phone and it was all crackly. And I was just about to disconnect when I heard a voice say, is this Jackie? And I immediately knew. And my heart started pounding. And I said, yes, it is. And she said, you don't know me, but I'm Carol's daughter. And we've just had a massive earthquake. And I asked her how she was doing. And she said her house had had some damage. The floor had buckled by the back door. They couldn't get out the back door, but the front door was okay. And they had disaster supplies, but she could not find her mom. And her mom lived, it would be like in the Vancouver area, living in Vancouver, and her mom lived in New West, too far to walk. And so she was worried sick about her mom. So phones were not working down there, but she was able to call long distance, which sometimes happens. And so we disconnected and I tried calling Carol and nothing happened. And I kept at it and I kept at it and I tried again and again. And finally, Carol picked up the phone and I said, Carol, it's Jackie in Vancouver. How are you? She said, oh, you'll never guess we've had a massive earthquake. I said, Carol, I know. And I've spoken to your daughter. She said, oh my God, you've spoken to my daughter. I've been worried sick about her. Now, who would have thought a call through Vancouver would connect a family in Christchurch? So this does work, but it's only going to work if you've got it in place before the disaster
Mhm.
happens. And to build on that, the more options you have to connect, the better your chances. So, texting can work, phone calls, your out of area contact, even like social media, Facebook, things like that, having meeting places established. This is all part of what you need to do to get your family prepared.
And it sounds like something we should all be doing, but I'll bet you find when you go out, and I'm going to put myself in this picture, not being prepared for emergencies. I'll do it sometime, but so why is it that people put off getting prepared for the emergencies, which will happen at one point for all of us?
Oh, it will. And I think I've heard in, the years I've been doing this, I've heard just about every excuse. And the real ones that stand out are people don't know where to start. It's overwhelming. Like you Google earthquake preparedness and you get millions of hit, Google forest fires. And, again, you get so many different websites to go to. Where do you even start with that? So, you need to, that's the excuse I hear a lot of. And people are busy, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, and tomorrow never comes, something else, a new priority pops up. And my favorite is, well, what if I do prepare and I can't access my kits? And, my response to that is, well, what if you didn't prepare and you could have accessed your kits? Wouldn't that be work? But that would be so much worse than, not being able to have the supplies you need. And that's why I created my online program. I've broken it down. I've made it into simple steps. And it is the basics. You can go a lot more into it, but if you have the basics, you're going to get through much better than somebody that has never done anything to prepare themselves, their families, or their pets.
And we'll have the link to the online program shortly. You'll provide me with that, Jackie, so we can
Yeah.
share that with everybody. Now, you talk about being prepared. Have you ever found yourself in an emergency and not been prepared?
I guess I'm fortunate. I teach a lot of workshops, so I always have a grab and go kit in my car. So I've got one at home. I am pretty well prepared. Could I do more? There's probably more things I could get. I know I did go to my kit to look for something, and I noticed that a couple of the items were outdated. Fortunately, I was able to update them before something happened. But no, I'm pretty well prepared. So I think I will be good, and I have been good so far.
Mm. Oh, that's good. So, a question for you here, because we're talking about being prepared in our home with our families. Now, what happens if I'm driving merrily along the highway and all of a sudden there's an earthquake and I'm in my car out in really not near anything? So, what do I do?
You pull over to the side of the road when it's safe to do so, and then you listen to the radio. That will often tell you if there's damage ahead, if roads are damaged. If you're going to get out of your vehicle, make sure there's no down power lines. You don't want to be putting yourself in danger. And then once you know if the road is safe or not safe, you'll have to make a decision based on that. And having a car kit in your car is something else to think about. Having a blanket, some snacks, some water, just a jacket. Living in Vancouver, it can rain, it can be sunny, we just don't know. So having a few supplies in your car and a car kit can be beneficial. And reach out to your out of area contact if you can phone them and just check in and let people know where you are.
You mentioned before about sometimes people are pets are in apartments. So what would I do? I'm here now, I'm stranded on the road, an earthquake's happened. I've got pets at home, and how do I get them out? Do I get a neighbor to get them out of the house? What happens? What emergency can you provide for pets at that point?
When you have a pet, whatever type of pet you have, you need to have emergency supplies. So, like we have a grab and go kit, your pet should also have a grab and go kit that you would, when evacuating, take that with you. If you're going to be away, have a neighbor that can check in on your pets and make sure they're okay. If you're going out for a couple of hours, it's going to be a little more difficult. But if they know that that is the plan, they can knock on your door, see if you're home, and quickly grab your pets. Now, having said that, if you've got a dog, probably a little more easy. But if you have a cat, the cats are probably going to panic. The first sign of a fire alarm, and cats go and hide. So, training your pets is something a lot of people do, getting your cat into the cat carrier, making sure you've got a leash by the door so you can easily get your pet out. So just again, it's planning, it's, counting on your neighbors, counting on your family and friends to help support you when something happens.
Hmm. Do you see, we are so reliant on our technology. Do you see coming down the pike anytime in the near future, new technologies that will allow us to communicate in emergencies when all other power sources are lost to us, have died?
Things are evolving so fast. I am sure that will be the case and probably not that far off. One thing to consider right now is a lot of communities in the Lower Mainland and other parts of British Columbia have alertables. I know the city of Vancouver has alertable, and it's an app you put on your phone, and if something happens, you'll get updates from the city on what's going on. So if you say you work in Vancouver and live in White Rock, if you had the alertables app, you would have it for White Rock, you might have it for every community in between to get and Vancouver, and you would get updates on, what roads are closed, what bridges, have been impacted, and the cities will keep those updated. The province also, emergency notifications you can sign up for. Um, so just staying on top of things like that. But I would encourage everybody, if their community does have alertables, to sign up so you can get those updates and find out what is happening.
Thank you. In terms of your own career now as a disaster preparedness specialist, have you had any particular challenges in your career or hurdles that you've had to overcome? And if so, as you've progressed through the years, and how did you overcome some of these challenges?
When I started, which was many, many years ago, probably 30 years ago, emergency management was a thing, but not really like it is today. And, we're seeing more and more disasters happen, and the whole emergency management field is exploding with, new courses coming online. There's degree programs. When I started, there was, I think, one program in all of Canada. Now, there's lots of programs. For me, I just stuck with it, and I sort of grew as emergency management grew. I always chose to stay with the emergency support services, which is the volunteer program. And emergency support services are the volunteers that will open up the reception centers when disasters happen. And each community in British Columbia has an ESS program. And that's where my heart is, helping the people, helping them get prepared, but also helping the people that have, maybe lost everything, working in the reception centers, worked with some fabulous volunteers over the years and still keep in touch with them. I retired from the city of Vancouver about 2 years ago, and that lasted a week. I'm now full-time with the city of Pitt Meadows. So I haven't done very good at retirement. I've launched the online program, but my passion is getting people prepared and also helping people. And I've seen time and time again the difference of what it means to be prepared. I get sent across the province to respond to a lot of the large disasters, and, lots of stories of people, when Lytton had when the whole town burnt to the ground. I worked with a lot of those people that came into the reception centers, and hearing about how they lost absolutely everything. They didn't have a home to go back to. And, what do you do? How do you get through that? And you think, well, if you don't have a home to go back to, why be prepared? But it still makes a difference because you have plans, you know where to start as you start rebuilding.
Mhm.
And, helping people in that situation is really rewarding, and they appreciate it. And yeah, I've just loved it for all these years. I don't see myself getting out of it. I've created the online program, still doing lots of presentations for businesses, travel the province teaching ESS teams. So yeah, it's a big part of my life and a big part of what I do.
Is there a particular incident, situation, or story that you can share that you've experienced over the years working with people?
Uh, Yeah, Joe and Hilda. So they were a couple that lived in Lytton. And you may remember back to that, Lytton was breaking heat records. They were about 50 degrees Celsius, and it was unbearable for all those people. And Joe and Hilda lived in a little tiny home, right in Lytton. They had lived there for over 50 years. And So they never left Lytton. That was their home. That's where they stayed. Occasionally they'd venture out to Kamloops, but they pretty much didn't leave. And with this heat, Hilda was saying it was just so hot they didn't know what to do. They had fans, they had wet towels draped around their necks, and they'd even put tin foil up in their windows to try and reflect the heat. One evening they were sitting at home and all of a sudden they heard all this commotion, get out, fire, fire. And, they ran outside, and as they looked, the flames were quickly approaching their home. And they had a vehicle, they had an old truck, but the truck never left Lytton, and it was not a roadworthy truck. And somehow they made it down to Chilliwack, where I was working in a reception center there. And they arrived, and I was walking through the reception center, and I saw them sitting in a corner, and they just looked devastated, and went up to them and, asked them how they were. And she told me the story, and she said, I always knew we should have prepared, but we just never bothered to do it. Fortunately, ESS, Emergency Support Services, was there. We were able to provide them some support, put them up in a hotel. And I just got a letter from her not that long ago, and saying, thanks to ESS. Without ESS, they would never have gotten through this event. And, it meant a lot to me, but also to the ESS, or the Emergency Support Services teams that, had responded. We do a lot to help people. And we don't usually hear people, they get the services, they go off. But she said that, for many years now, they've been out of a home. They finally have, a place back near Lytton where they're able to stay, and they're rebuilding. But she said, had they been prepared, it would have made a huge difference. And as a story I share often, really highlights the importance of being prepared. They lost absolutely everything. So
So how could they, having an emergency preparedness kit would have helped them on the road? What else could they have done to help them be prepared?
they could have had insurance. If you've got insurance, that is going to help get you through. And what we're finding now with insurance, a lot of people can't afford it. Insurance is getting so expensive. Do I feed my kids, or do I get insurance? And so that is it's really sad, because if you have insurance, you're gonna, get through it much better. But they had they had, with a when you've got a plan, you will know where you're going to go. You'll know some of the steps you need to take, and it just takes a little bit off your plate. Like, if you don't have a plan, you don't know anything. Where am I going to stay? What am I going to do? What do I need? But if you're planned, you have a plan to where you're going to stay. You know what your next steps are going to be. So, it doesn't sound like much when you've absolutely lost everything, but it is a little bit more peace of mind helping you get through. So, you know, it really is important to be prepared for any disaster that could happen.
There's so much that's gone on in your career, from the sounds of it, from the time you started. As you said, there was nothing really available in terms of training. When you look back, is there any particular knowledge or some information you wish you'd known in the beginning, right, that would have helped you with working with disaster emergencies? Something that you didn't know, but you know now, and it would have made a world of difference for you then.
Working with the emergency support services teams, running the reception centers, and being there to support the people, it's being flexible and adaptable.
Mhm.
And, you're going in this direction, something changes, you got to go in that direction. So going with the flow, being able to change, being able to adapt has made it much easier. And I was just teaching a program, the other day, locally here in the Lower Mainland, and shared that same information with the people in the class about, you just don't know what's going to happen. You've got to be ready for anything. And, when you know what you're doing, it's going to be much easier. And that doesn't matter if you're an emergency support services team, or if you're a person who lives in the neighborhood. You've got to have your plans. You've got to be adaptable. You've got to be flexible. And that's going to help get you through the disaster much better.
Mm. You're a very good speaker. And were you always a very good speaker? At what stage of your career, as you had to go out and start doing workshops and you're dealing with people, communicating what they need to know so that they understand it? At what stage did you realize that really being an effective communicator was really, really important for what you do?
I was so scared to go up and talk to people. I would panic. I couldn't do it. And I joined Toastmasters, and that really got me through. It gave me the opportunity to practice. My Toastmaster club was the best prepared club in all of British Columbia. They got lecture after lecture from me, but that is what really got me up. So I could talk to people, and it's something I still practice. I work with a speech coach. Have a couple of coaches I work with because I believe there's always room for improvement, always, more learning to do. I've done a lot of media, I've done, interviews, and yeah, it all started with going to that first Toastmaster meeting and going through the Toastmaster journey to become a better speaker. And I keep speaking and I keep getting coached, and hopefully I keep doing better. But I want to get my message out. So that's what keeps me going.
And I think being able to communicate a message clearly, accurately, and consistently so that people eventually get it is what's key. And I just I listen to you and I go, oh, you are so articulate. I wish some of our politicians could take note, right?
It
What should, oh, go ahead. I just
One of the things talking, updating the evacuees, if you've had a big apartment fire and you're bringing all these people together, you really have to be clear. You have to be concise. And, I think that's really helped me learn, you know, how to best deliver what I'm delivering.
in terms of emergency preparedness, what do you see happening in the future in the field of people getting prepared in terms of the instruction, in terms of the official organization of helping people? Do you see any changes coming down the pike and how things will be handled? Will they be handled differently in the future? What your comments?
It's very it's evolving. If you look at the forest fires, we've had a number of forest fires. LA, they never expected that to happen in LA. And I think locally we've seen the Fire Smart program. People are really taking that seriously. Prince George just, sent out a message saying to all of their residents, if you do Fire Smart and get your yards and homes prepared, enter a draw to, win a kit. And we never used to see that. We never used to see people, thinking about being fire smart. And while here in the lower mainland, we could be impacted by a forest fire, but not like, up north. But I think for us here, earthquakes, we had a couple of shakers a few months back, and I was nonstop for about 2 weeks. And then it kind of falls back. People become complacent again. But I think, as we move forward, emergency management, the whole field is growing, more people coming in. The emergency management, it used to just be one or two people that worked in it. Now we're seeing more, bigger teams. The province is taking a lead role in it, getting people prepared. And I think we have to work together. It's not something one person can do. We've got to talk about it. We've got to encourage people to get prepared. And the more and more disasters we're seeing, like, where forest fires are burning right now. And fortunately, there's no towns impacted, but that could change. And we've all got to be prepared. We've all got to do our part. And, people think the city or the town is going to come and help support them. They're not right away. ESS will set up to look after people, but that's going to take time. We all need to take responsibility for ourselves, our family, and our pets, and do what we can do to protect ourselves. And that's where it all starts, is being prepared for you and then branching out.
Do you find people are becoming more willing to prepare, getting more prepared than they were 30 years ago when you started out?
Definitely. Yeah. People are more open to it now. I think with social media, we're seeing more and more, it's so much easier to see what is happening, but we are also seeing more and more events. And you turn on the news any day and there's some sort of a weather event, there's some sort of a disaster that is happening. So, as we're coming into summer now, it's the forest fires are increasing. We had the heat dome a few years ago, that could happen again, where, seniors were losing their lives in their apartments and just because they weren't prepared, they didn't know what to do. Neighbors didn't know what to do. So lots of education happening, but people, it's all going to start with you being prepared at home and then, helping other people.
What's a major difference? You mentioned earlier about different emergencies require different kits. What would be a major difference between a fire kit, having a fire kit, and an earthquake kit?
It's not so much the kit that is different. You're still going to need what you need. It's the response that is different. So if you look at an earthquake, our response is drop, cover, and hold on, get underneath a heavy table, wait for the shaking to stop, count 60, and then assess your surroundings and make a decision based on what you find. If you're looking at a forest fire, you're on an evacuation alert, usually is how it starts. So that's when you start loading your kits into your vehicle. So if the evacuation order is dropped, that's when you have to get out of town quickly. So, with flooding, lift things up, get them out of your basement, move those weed killers, so they're not going to get into the water, move any valuables, your photo albums up high. So it's just, knowing what the disaster can do and how you can respond. But, kits, you've got to make sure you've got your basics. What a lot of people don't think about with their kits is medications. I am a diabetic. If I don't get my insulin, I'm not going to survive. And if you're familiar with insulin, it needs to be kept refrigerated. So how do I keep my insulin in my grab and go kit? I can't because it won't, be good to use when that happens. So I've worked with my family doctor about how to do that. So anybody that's on medications, talk to your family doctor about how to store your medications, but make sure you've got access to them. And that's a huge part of it. And just having all of the other items in your kit. You and I both wear glasses. And, next time you get your prescription renewed, throw your old glasses into your emergency kit. So if you have to run out and don't have time to find your glasses, you've got them. Throw a set of car keys in. I have been to so many fires where people run out. Their car is sitting right there. They could drive to mom and dad's, but they forgot their car keys in the house. So having a set of car keys, having some cash. If you've got teenagers, do not tell them there's cash in your kits, but having some cash available. If the power is out, those bank machines may not be working. So lots of things to think about.
Isn't that interesting about the cash? Because I never ever have cash. It's just I use my card for everything. And it was a couple of years ago, a friend of mine actually, she was in the same situation, always using her card. And she went to the bank machine and something had happened. The system was down. A lot of things were down
Yeah.
where she was, and she had no access to her money. I
Oh,
mean, it
I
didn't
know.
matter which bank she went to because the system, something had happened. It
Yeah.
was a glitch. And then she said after that, I'm going to carry. Don't have to be a lot, doesn't have to be a lot of cash, but a little
Yeah.
bit of cash.
Lessons learned. I know I bought a banana yesterday. I was starving to death and I had to use my debit card to buy a 39-cent banana because I didn't have any cash on me and I felt a little funny, but cashier just rolled her eyes at me. But
Oh,
yeah, having cash is critical.
what would you say is one of your biggest learning or the top three learnings of your career that's now, as you say, spanned about 30 years?
The top three things are the importance of being prepared and having a plan. And that is what's going to get you through. Um, I've also learned, how to help people in a disaster. And, when responding in a reception center and you get people come in, we want to sort of, you say, oh, you're going to be okay, everything's going to be fine. And it's really hard not to say that, but we don't know if everything's going to be fine. So just different ways to deal with people and how to help them, but to let them help themselves. But I think everything is really tied into the importance of having a plan and being prepared. And, don't lose faith. You'll get you've got to get your kits together. You got to plan for it and just keep working at it. You don't have to do it all today. Break it down and, work at it to get it done. And that's the key. So I think, yeah, the main thing I have learned is the importance of being prepared.
Mm. The one thing well, there are a number of things I'm going to take away from everything that you've mentioned, this morning or today. But a key one for me is to have duplicates, like duplicate house keys, duplicate car keys. All I ever do is just have my own. And once in a while, I'll loan it, my keys to somebody else, but I really need some spare ones somewhere.
Yeah,
Should they be required? Should something, need to be done? So that's a big learning for me. And the other thing too is the documentation, duplicating documentation, which could be not only, house insurance, but your will, your passport, driver's license, anything that you need that might be destroyed in a house, a fire, but I'll have it elsewhere, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And it's so much easier too when you have I can't even talk here, duplicates of something than to reapply, right? To
Yes. Yeah.
reapply for that license, apply for something else. The bare essentials, if you could just share before we wrap up, what are the bare essentials that every emergency kit should have? There probably are some extra things, but the nuts and bolts, the bare things that you say every kit should have.
If we look at grab and go kits, your grab and go kit should have a change of clothes. It should have your medications after you've talked to your doctor about how to store medications. It should have, some granola bars, a bottle of water, a set of car keys, glasses, copies of your ID, and anything you're going to need to survive the next, several hours if you've been forced to flee your home. Your home kit, that's where you're going to store for a longer period. And you often see be prepared for 72 hours. And from recent events, we've seen 72 hours is often not enough. So you need to store food and water for your family and your pets. You need to um, have like a can opener, flashlights, a radio, all of those sort of things. If you're a camper, you've probably got a lot of these items already, but they're on my website. There is a list for grab and go kits that people can download, and it will list out all of the basic items. But it's really sitting down with that list, with your family. If you've got like babies, you need to think about diapers. You need to think about the food that they're going to need. Seniors maybe on more medications, what do they need? So it's really looking at yourself and determining what you need. And also include a comfort item. I did an interview, back in my early days of Vancouver, and I was on breakfast television back then with the morning anchor, and I was nervous. I was shaking like a leaf. And she said, Jackie, what do you have in your grab and go kit? And first thing I pulled out was a bag of makeup. To this day, I haven't lived down the fact I've got makeup in my kit, but it was important to me. I wanted to look half decent in an earthquake. But you're going to have items that you may not find on the list I've prepared, but include them just with your grab and go kit. It has to be carryable, like a backpack works well, not a suitcase on wheels. Your home kit is going to be what you would put in a Rubbermaid bin to support your family. And I know people that live in little tiny apartments are going, I've got no room to store that. I lived down in Yale Town in a little tiny apartment, and I just used the bottom shelf of the kitchen cupboard, and I was on my own. I just stored my stuff there, and that worked fine. So get creative. You need to store these items. And your grab and go kit supports your home kit. So, if having them both, you're going to get through it much better than somebody that has never done anything.
Really, really good advice. And the one thing I would add, especially where people have families, I like the idea of having a meeting point, like an area
Yes.
and the out of town contact as well. Had
Yeah.
never given that a thought to have an town contact. But the story that you mentioned about your friend in Australia, really that hit home. That hit
Yeah.
home.
Yeah.
So anything that you'd like to share right now before we wrap up? Any words of wisdom or a special story that drives home a particular point that really made your day? Anything you'd like to share, Jackie, before we go?
I think the key thing is you need to get prepared. Everybody has to be prepared. For those of us living in the lower mainland, earthquakes, they can and do happen. We all witnessed that a few months back, and we could get a significant earthquake, and we need to be prepared. But not only for the big events, if you have a house fire, it's going to help get you through. We're in forest fire season right now. So people that live, where forest fires can impact us, they need to be prepared. They need to get their vehicles ready to go. And so it really comes down to preparedness and the level of preparedness that, the better prepared you are, the better you're going to get through whatever disaster comes your way.
Well, thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you, thank you. And Jackie's contact information is here as we wrap up on the last screen. Thank you so much for coming, Jackie, and sharing this information about being prepared. Be
Oh, happy to
prepared.
do it.
All right, everybody. I'd like to wish everybody mountains of success, and including Jackie, wishing you all mountains of success.